Citizens of the world, welcome back to another Keep Yours podcast where we try and keep a few dollars in your pocket that you wouldn't otherwise have. This week we continue on our COVID series. Of course, that's all that's in the news is COVID all the time. So we can keep talking about it. Well, let's start with the good news. The good news is PPP program got refunded, and it turns out that even our unfriendly banks like Wells Fargo are getting deals done. I've had a few different friends and clients send me over Wells Fargo approved PPP loans. That's excellent. Unfortunately, Wells Fargo told a lot of people, sorry, we don't really care about you. Then they've come back and tried to do a little bit for some of their customers, which is good. Long term, I'll do another podcast specifically on, you just got shown that these big banks don't care about you. So what should you do in the future? If you want a bank that cares about you, that values you as a client, that doesn't put you on the back burner, but there's also the other side of it. I mean, I always try and put myself and sit in both chairs. So if I'm sitting in the banker's chair, here's what else I see. I see that if you're an individual who is eligible for a $10,000 loan, for the bank to underwrite that, they're going to get 3%. That's their underwriting fee. So it's $300 on $10,000. For $300, the bank has to collect all of your information, potentially open an account for you, and put that information through underwriting to make sure all your documentation matches up. For $300, banks typically wouldn't touch that type of loan. And I think that's been part of the issue. I mean, obviously, regardless of what business you run, if every single person that you've ever contacted for your business called you tomorrow and said, everybody wants what you have to sell, and you only have so much of it, whether that's, let's just say you're an exterminator, and everybody that you've ever dealt with, everyone in the whole neighborhood calls tomorrow and wants to book services. Well, who are you going to provide services to? Well, you're going to start with the list of people who have been good customers before. And banks did the exact same thing. The other issue that banks had that helped a lot was banks were also able to, their bigger customers are typically their more sophisticated customers. So they were able to collect the information they needed for underwriting faster and easier from their bigger customers. Now, I know that the law does not say that banks need to collect all this underwriting information. But that's where if you understand the banking system a little bit, you go, oh yeah, well, that's what the rules say today. And if you follow the news, you've seen that now all of the politicians want to get up in arms about who should have got loans and whether or not they're happy with the way the program is run and whether or not they're happy with the law that they wrote. You're a politician and you wrote the law, or you didn't even read it, but every single person voted for it. This got voted through unanimously. And now we're going to go back and say, well, we're not happy with the way that it's written. We're not happy with the way that it's put out. Well, guess what? Banks are similarly concerned with whether or not they're going to give out free money and whether or not the SBA, if these loans go bad, is actually going to give them the money back for them. So they're still doing underwriting. They're still making sure that the documentation is correct, even though the law says that the business owner certifies. And basically the bank can just say they certified, we're good. Whether or not the SBA will accept that, totally different. Then we hear this news that the SBA is going to start auditing people. Well, the SBA has about 1,000 people working for it, and they just issued millions of loans. So I'm not sure exactly how they're going to audit all of this. That's kind of a good luck. The IRS audits a fraction of tax returns every year. I don't know how the SBA would audit more than a very small fraction of these loans. And in many aspects, a lot of the companies that took them out that people are upset about, they were actually taking out the money as a loan. They weren't expecting it to be forgiven back because a lot of them have laid off their employees. So if you've done that, if you run a hotel and you've asked for and you went and got the money like the guy in Texas did, well, that's a loan. Yeah, it's a very low interest loan. So he's saving some interest money, but he's not getting it forgiven because he's not keeping all of his employees because they're all laid off already. So there's a lot of aspects to this, but at the end of the day, if your bank didn't go to bat for you and doesn't show that they care about you, then just like anything else, you have a voice. And your voice is your wallet and your money. And the banks want your depository account. They do. So switch banks. And we'll see how many people are actually going to do that, because usually what the data shows is everyone gets too lazy and doesn't really care about it. And while they'll say that they're upset right now, they're too lazy to do anything about it. So hopefully if you're one of those people who's unhappy with Wells Fargo or another bank and how you've been treated, you realize that maybe, especially for your business, it's better to bank elsewhere and you move your money. I'll do a spiel on that one later. Other thing that came through this week that's good, unemployment. So fewer backlogs and more people getting their extra $600 a week, which is in part why we're not really feeling we'll call it the economic impact of this. And one of the reasons the stock market remains inflated, because people still have money in their pockets. Because as of March 29th, when they passed the law, everyone's getting an extra $600 a week on unemployment, which is so much money that a lot of people don't want to go back to work. And I can't blame them. If you were working at Walmart making $15 an hour and now you can be on unemployment, and instead of collecting roughly $2,500 a month, you're collecting $4,000, it kind of gives you no incentive to go back to work. So that's something we're going to deal with for the next few months. But the thing that'll come after is the 30 million people that are now on unemployment, 30 million and counting. And since the states aren't fully caught up yet, I expect that number to rise even more, which is a staggering number. That's worse than Great Depression numbers. These are the largest numbers ever. And yet the stock market goes up because the Fed's printing money. I don't understand it. It is what it is right now. But good for the people collecting $600 a week. Realize if that's you, this only goes on while your total unemployment benefits got extended to a total of 39 weeks. You only get that extra $600 for 16 weeks. So there's a free, I'll call it free, extra, whatever you want to call it, $10,000 for people on unemployment. Come later this year, that bill comes due, right? Now, we've seen all sorts of other negative news coming out. While the money printing from the Fed is raising the stock market, there's tons of other news coming out that is not good at all. Lots of forbearance on car loans, lots of forbearance on mortgages. And the question is, okay, once the forbearance period is over, who's going to be able to pay? Same thing with the credit card companies. And while some people are collecting extra unemployment money that's going to help them pay their bills, which could be argued as a transfer to banks, I'm not going to really go there right now. This is still going to set up a big problem come the fall. So right now, the housing market doesn't look depressed at all because there's a lack of supply, because one, you can't kick anyone out of a place even if they aren't paying rent. So even if you wanted to sell a place that someone's not paying rent on, you can't. Two, a lot of people are forbearing their mortgages down the road. Now, we're hearing different things from different mortgage companies. Some are saying, hey, when that forbearance period is over, you owe us a lump sum and we need all those payments. And sometimes that's because those companies are paying those out to the people who own the bonds and at their interest payments. And the companies are still making those even though they're not collecting money from people. So pretty soon they're going to have a cash squeeze and they're going to get stuck. There's going to be a lot more layers of this onion that get peeled down as we go on with this. And I don't know that there's going to be any really solid creative way to stop this. I mean, it's got to run its course. And the longer that we pretend that federal deficit spending is going to pull us all out of it and make it all okay, the longer we're going to be in trouble. And here's layers of the onion showing up this week. The unemployment numbers being the worst we've ever seen. Manufacturing numbers are down and terrible. We're starting to see the beginning of bankruptcies, whether it's J. Crew on the clothing end, you're going to see more. The first mall went bankrupt. You're going to see more malls go bankrupt. You're going to see more businesses go bankrupt. But it's going to take a little bit of time for these to work through because the Fed's throwing so much money out there. There's going to be probably a massive reorganization within commercial property. And commercial property is going to be hit on several levels. Are people going back to the office at the same rate? Probably not. Not anytime in the short term. It's going to be, from best case scenario, sounds like we're at social distancing for probably 2 years and we've got layers of this disease coming back. And right now, they've got nothing for us. And what I mean by nothing for us is they don't have testing that we need. They don't have, if you do get tested, they don't have any treatment for you up front. It's wait until you are almost dead and go to the hospital and then get some treatment. But what are we doing with people in the meantime? I don't know. We also have a lack of indicators. We're saying, oh, we're going to check everyone's temperature. Well, if half the people have no symptoms, then checking their temperature doesn't matter because they're having no symptoms. So we've got a lot more questions than we have answers right now. And that's going to protract this out a lot longer. Now we're seeing everybody's happy because restrictions are being lifted. But what's that going to mean? That means we're going to have more transmission and eventually probably another type of lockdown, maybe as severe as this one. I don't know. But the coronavirus is not gone. It's coming back. And whether it fades out over the summer like we saw with the Spanish flu in 1918 and comes back strong in the fall, or whether it stays with us the whole time, we don't know. There's so many things we don't know. And that's got to be the modus operandi for everybody right now is there's more questions than there are answers. And that's really the message I want to get across to everybody is we don't know. And I keep hearing this word pent-up demand as though we're going to flip a switch and everyone's going to go get back on an airplane and get back in hotels and get back to traveling and get back to spending money the same and have the same amount of concerts and the same amount of events and everything else, back to weddings and celebrations and family gatherings and all the rest of it's just going to happen in a snap, in a flinch. And the reality is that's just not the case. This is going to be with us for a while. The first podcast that I did on COVID was this is just the beginning. This is going to be here for a while. We haven't dealt with anything like this. And I'm not going off of like I'm some genius and it's my epidemiology information. I'm just listening and reading what the experts are saying. And the problem we have in America right now is we're not listening to the experts. We're listening to politicians who don't know anything. And especially 45, who does not really have a clue about how any of this works. He just wants it to conform to his agenda. So testing's not available, but we want to reopen the economy. Doesn't make any sense. We have to do things in an orderly process. And if we all have to get this, if we need herd immunity before we get on this, then there's two ways we're going to get that. Either one, everyone gets sick, or two, they got to develop a vaccine. So all the scientists say before they get the time to develop a vaccine and roll a vaccine out, for the world, we're looking at 1.5 to 2 years, probably best case scenario. I will say Fauci is one of the most highly respected doctors in his field. And this is what he is saying. So why are we believing anything other than what the experts in the field are saying? And the coronavirus could morph. Now it could morph and go away. It also could morph and get worse. And developing a vaccine is not just a simple, easy process. So it's going to take a while. And remember, Spanish flu never developed a vaccine. So we're here for a while. Now, what is that going to do for us individually and individually with our money? Well, first off, you need to conserve your cash. So I don't believe that this pent-up demand means people are going to go out. Right now, I already see in the car market, the car companies, knowing that they have tons of cars on the lot, they're talking about reopening lines to put out more cars that people currently aren't buying, and nobody needs a new car if they're not driving anywhere. So they're offering 0%, and people are rushing out. 0%. Oh, it's a great deal. They saved me a couple thousand on the total for all of my payments. I'm saving the interest. It's 0% is a gimmick. 0% is a discount given to you over a longer period of time from your purchase price. At the end of the day, you have a total purchase price you're going to pay for a car. That includes everything. The price you're paying to the dealer for the car, the taxes that you're paying on the car, the long-term warranty you might buy on the car, the gas that you're going to spend on the car, the interest expense that you're going to pay, the repairs and maintenance. All of those costs are real costs that go to ownership. You're going to pay insurance to have the car. Right? All of those are real. So all they're doing is saying, look, we're going to reduce the interest expense portion of that, which is already low because interest rates have been low. So if you go from a 4% rate at a credit union to a 0% rate, now over 7 years, which is what they're offering loans at, which is a crazy timetable to repay a loan, okay, you save a few $1,000s. Well, guess what? If you go buy a used car, you could save a few $1,000s just on the price of the car. which means that there's less money you're paying interest on. And car prices are going to continue to drop. So because the federal government's printing money, the peeling of the layers of the onion and how fast and how quickly we get through what we're going to call the bad debts, it just slows it down because people continue to have more money in their pocket than they should. There's all these forbearance, but we'll start seeing it in car markets first. The used car market, cars are sitting on the lots. You have the other aspect of this, which is huge, which is car rental companies are all suffering. About 80% of their business is from travel, and guess what people are not doing? Traveling. So you see, if you go around the country right now, there are stadium parking lots that are filled with rental cars that nobody's using. Those rental cars are a liability to that company because they're not being used and they still have to make the payments on them. So what do you think they're going to do with them? They're going to start selling them into a market that's already flooded with used cars. And until we get back to flying around and traveling at the same rates that we were before, and that's going to take a long time, rental car companies are going to be slashing how many cars that they currently have and, not buying new ones, reducing that demand. So the supply-demand curve on used cars just went crazy. Tons of demand, very low supply. So thinking that you're rushing out buying a brand new car with a no interest rate and you're saving yourself a bunch of money, have a little bit of patience and you will have amazing deals on used cars coming later this year in the not too distant future. And they already have shown this because the auction market rates that people are paying are way down because everyone's worried about being able to sell them. This is going to continue. This is one layer of the onion. We're just starting to get to the beginning layers of the onion. Another thing that came out last week, terrible news. And the federal government's now talking about it a lot more, which is state and local. So when we're all sitting at home and we're not buying more and more things and we're not going out doing things, well, there's a whole lot less sales tax revenue collected. And if property values start to drop, there'll be a whole lot less property taxes collected. But sales tax revenue alone, not just sales tax revenue, hotel tax. And if you've stayed in a hotel in the last decade, you've realized that all the states and cities went, we're going to add a hotel tax onto that because that's going to pay for our advertising budgets. That's also going to pay for our marketing teams that we're going to build internally to build our own ads for come visit. Well, guess what? No sales tax revenue, or way down. No lodging tax revenue, because people aren't traveling around lodging. So all of a sudden, state and local budgets are getting slashed. Here in Colorado, late Friday night, the governor said, and by the way, we're slashing $300 million of spending immediately because we don't have the sales tax revenue for it. That means that the layoffs from the government side, state and local governments, will start continuing. There will also be less hiring. There will also be fewer services provided. This is going to continue across the country. So this is just the beginning of the layers of the onion that are unraveling. What else? So despite the fact that there's all of this negative news, the stock market continues to go up, which I can only assume is because the Fed continues to print money and buy up all the bonds, and therefore a lot of the bond money is being shoved into stocks. But the multiples are still crazy. What we saw this week, Wayfair loses $286 million in the quarter, stock goes up. It's gone from, I think, $25 up to $165 on a company that's losing money. So I've got a lot more questions than anyone's got answers for. But the stock market seems to believe that everything's rosy and all of this pent-up demand and everyone's about to go out and spend all of this extra money that doesn't exist. And once the government stops printing money, I think we're going to see a new reality. But in the meantime, there's all sorts of business models getting challenged that have never been through a real recession before. So Airbnb itself, obviously people aren't traveling, renting properties. So Airbnb itself is cutting back. Well, what about all the people who own the Airbnb properties that they're renting? And a lot of people decided this was a very good market and it helped drive up real estate prices because when you rent something out by the day, you can make a lot more money than if you rent something out by the month. And if you need to look at that in any way, shape, or form, go to any place that's super reliant on tourism. So down the street, Vail, Colorado. Vail property prices are not based on any reality of people living in them. They are based off of the rental that you can get, especially during ski season. So from late December, right before Christmas, all the way through March, that is when people collect most of their rental income on those properties. And that rental income they collect is then determining the price of the property. So if you rented a property monthly, let's say you could rent it for $2,000. But if I rent it every night, I can rent it for $200 a night and collect $6,000, which means that the price that I can pay for the property is higher. Well, a lot of people liked this business model, seemed to make sense to them, and 1/3 of Airbnb property renters have 25 or more properties. Now, locally, those may still do okay in specific markets, because I have a feeling that depending on social distancing requirements, a lot more Americans are going to be trying to do some sort of traveling domestically. There will be a lot of people on the road driving because flying's not going to be safe. But we'll see how fast driving is. We'll see what kind of secondary crises we have with infections and how much restrictions they put on travel. I'm very interested to see what we do in Colorado, whether we ask people to not come to the state for travel. And we're a state heavily reliant on travel, both winter and summer. People love to come to the Rockies. Are we going to ask people not to come? Are we going to keep the campgrounds closed? Or are we going to keep the RV parks minimized? I don't know. Nobody knows. We'll see. It depends on how fast this virus is spreading. But a lot of people with Airbnbs are going to get stuck with a lot less income, which means those properties will probably end up a lot of the back on the market to be sold. You also have a lot of landlords with tenants not paying rent. You see these no rent months coming, people refusing to pay rent. Well, how are those landlords supposed to keep paying their mortgages and pay for taxes and pay their interest payments? And, some of those can be deferred, but maintenance expenses don't get deferred, property taxes don't get deferred, or the state and local governments don't have any money. So you have a lot of layers of this onion coming out. Uber's another perfect example. Oh, we could lose money for decades and never make a penny. The guy who started Uber is a billionaire. Uber has never made money. That's amazing to me. And we're seeing the same thing. The WeWork looks like a terrible business model now. How are we going to social distance inside of office buildings remains to be seen. And office buildings in general, big question mark. Are those going to be as necessary? Now that people have learned to work from home or, work remotely, and managers have been forced to learn how to manage remotely, more importantly, because I think that was a limiting factor. I think employees for a long time have wanted the flexibility of working from home. For those of us who have the option to do it, we know that, hey, the days that I don't have to commute, I save an hour each way in the car. Wow. 2 hours of my time I get back, that's very valuable. Even if I only do that 2 or 3 days a week, that's still a huge savings. So, okay, I might come into the office every other day, twice a week. We'll see. As long as social distancing is required, how do you social distance in an office going in and out of the bathroom or out of the hallways or in the elevators? Seems pretty impossible. The airlines in Europe have come out, and the airports themselves have said, look, social distancing in an airport's impossible. It's just not practical. There's too many places where people have to go together. How are you supposed to really social distance on an airplane? Is that possible? Can you social distance on an airplane? Well, how are you going to get on and off? Are we not going to get in line anymore? What about going through security? What about bathrooms? What about hallways? What about elevators? What about escalators? There's only so much social distancing you can do, and sometimes it just becomes impractical. Disneyland's going to have the same problem. How do you social distance on rides and in lines? Constantly, you're in lines everywhere, and people are walking by you on the left and right. Social distancing seems like a good idea, hard to implement. So, will we have more outbreaks? Probably. That's what the experts say. Will schools reopen? Now, here's a huge problem with everybody going back to work that no one seems to really be talking about. Daycare. How are people whose children are now out of school, wait a minute, now they're also supposed to play teacher and make sure their kids are doing their classwork and trying to do that mobily in a system that's not set up for it, and where a lot of people don't necessarily have reliable internet access or computers to access the information they need to. So you have all sorts of problems in the education system, but the biggest one for parents going back to work is, where are the kids going? When are we going to open up daycares so parents can go to work? And also, what about schools so parents can go to work? Now I got a bigger question for you. What happens this fall with colleges? If there's outbreaks and the colleges are worried about outbreaks on campus, are they going to shut down campus again? Or is it going to go to mobile learning? Well, what if it does? And let's say, for the sake of the students, that all the students can still be the same. They could still do all of their classes online. Now, from what I've seen of studies, that doesn't work out that way. There is a difference in the value of in-person education, and the retention levels are much higher done in groups in person than they are remotely. But let's just assume we can get past all that. What happens to your local real estate market in your college town when none of the college kids show up for college? I don't have an answer for that. It's never happened before. But it's a reality question. There's a lot of real estate that's occupied by students. Now, students may save a whole lot of money on housing by living at home, which they probably should more often anyway, but there's going to be a whole lot of apartments in college towns that could be vacant if colleges don't go on. You have another huge problem for universities. And as part of the bad news this week, we got our first school casualty where a school is shutting down, and there will be a lot more. International students. Can international students even fly into the country? Don't know. Well, if they can't, that's going to be a big problem for a lot of schools because a lot of their revenue is based on international students. So all of a sudden you have all of these layers of the onion that are starting to unpeel, right? Meanwhile, cruise ships say they're going to start sailing later this year. Are you kidding me? If you're crazy enough to go get on a cruise ship this year and you get sick or you get stranded and no one wants you, you have to understand and own those consequences. You can't get on that ship and then later say, I want off of it when nobody wants to let it into port, when the whole boat's got COVID running all over it. How the hell are you going to social distance on what is basically a floating hotel? There's nothing but hallways and elevators and huge rooms for buffets. Craziness. I don't see that happening at all. But of course, they want to get back to business so they can get back to making money. Real estate in general. We just talked briefly about what's going to happen on college campuses and college real estate. Well, currently there's a very low supply of real estate. Of course there is. You can't kick anyone out. You can't sell a property you wanted to sell anyway, and people are fearing that the market's going to go down, so maybe they don't want to sell. And there's no bankruptcies happening right now because you can't kick anyone out. The courts are closed. But what happens when that goes away? What happens when all of a sudden the forbearance ends? So we'll see. So we're not seeing forbearance on car loans as a mandatory. So you'll see cars will be the first one. Cars and commercial real estate. Because commercial real estate, if you don't pay your rent and the landlord can rent it to somebody else, so be it. Now, if it's a restaurant, that's a whole nother problem. And this leads us into a question of jobs and how this new economy is going to happen. And I have a feeling that a lot of technology is going to be picked up and it's going to change our world forever. And I'm not going to go into a lot of the details on that right now because it's pretty speculative, but I do foresee that the same way that more people will be working from home, other things are going to change. And those other things changing will probably mean fewer job availabilities for people in the future. And that is not necessarily a good thing for the economy, but this is often what happens. So we have a lot more layers of the onion to unpeel on this. And meanwhile, I hear that, there's this pent-up demand and markets are rising because everyone feels like everything's going to reopen and straight back to the moon again with valuations gone crazy and everybody expecting to record record profits. Well, when the government prints $3 trillion in a couple of months, that's a whole lot of money into the economy. What happens when they stop printing money? What happens when the actual free market is allowed to ride out? What's going to happen then? Well, we're going to see it's first in cars and first in commercial real estate. Those two are going to drop. Then I expect we'll see the same thing in housing. And I expect the unemployment numbers are going to stay very high for way longer than we want. Once we have a vaccine and or a treatment, then we can begin, I'm going to say, square one of rebuilding. Until then, we're still in crisis mode. And anyone who tells you different is really out of their mind. We all want this to not have happened and to be over, but that's not the world we live in anymore. There's this thing in life called acceptance. And part of it's you have so few things you can control, so control the things you can, and we have to accept the other ones. We have to accept that this is the new paradigm that we're living in, and this is going to change things. We need to act accordingly. So when that comes to our personal finances and our business finances, watch, business owners are going to be very reluctant to just open everything up and grow like crazy. We already see that Congress is hopefully taking up and hopefully going to discuss with us the ramifications of our legal responsibilities as business owners. If I send one of my employees on a business trip, he gets COVID-19 and dies, am I responsible as the employer? Typically, that's never been the case. But this is not typical times, so nobody knows. So until we get answers to these questions, everybody's kind of in a we don't know freeze mode. And more of the things that I see that they're going to do, we're going to check everyone's temperature. Oh, but 50% of people show no symptoms and don't have an increase in temperature. So that's not going to prevent the disease from spreading. Now, people that are currently sick, that could identify them, sure. And then do we have tracers that are going to trace back everyone that they've been in contact with? Are we set up for that? Not in America, not yet. In a few countries, yes, they're doing that, and it's proven effective. In a few countries, they shut off international travel a lot faster than we did. Didn't allow things to spread quite as fast. And now they're saying this has probably been here a lot longer. And that's probably why the epidemic is a lot worse. And of course, the more concentrated space people are in, the faster and easier it can spread because you've got density of population, which is why it makes sense that New York's being hit so hard. So we have a lot of things still happening here. How social distancing is really going to work, we don't really know. We have no idea how a lot of these businesses are going to reopen, how we're going to reopen schools or college kids going. The experts say that we're going to have more outbreaks. I trust the experts. That's where I'm coming from. So when it comes to my personal finances, I'm long-term still very concerned. We're not past virus phase 1. We're still in this. We're still in lockdown. Everyone wants to pretend we're in recovery. Recovery does not begin until we have a cure or a treatment. And right now we have neither really. We have everything spaghetti at the wall idea. Hopefully something sticks. Hopefully something works. But the reality is humans were different. So it's hard to find something that works for all of us. So keep your spending to a minimum. If you happen to have a job still and you're still making good money, save it. Opportunities are going to come up for investments. The stock market will drop. I can't put a guarantee on that because the Fed keeps printing money, which forces more money into the market, but the stock market will drop. There is a long-term ramification to us printing $3 trillion. You can't run a $4 trillion deficit every year and continue as the world's reserve currency. The world will not allow it. The price of gold and silver will go up, not because the value of gold and silver is going up, but because the value of the dollar is going down. How can it not when you print $4 trillion a year of extra money? Just the reality of it. So, keep saving your money. Keep setting up a plan for what you're going to do going forward. Know that if I'm on unemployment benefits, even if I'm on PPP program, and that's going to give employers 2 months. What happens after those 2 months? Are more people going to get laid off after that? Probably. We're starting to see the state and local governments starting to lay off people. So we're just in the middle of this. The onion layers are just beginning to peel back. Be very conservative with your spending. Figure out what you need to spend on little else. Unfortunately, we're all going to spend a lot more time in our own homes this summer. I know we all want to get out. I want to get out too, but there's going to be a whole lot of risk associated with that. And Maybe the answer is that we all need to get sick and we need to have a plan on who's going to get sick and when, so we maintain hospital resources for those who do fall critically ill. I don't know what the right answer is, but what I do know is I got a lot more questions than answers. And until I get answers to those questions, I'm being very conservative with my approach to money, my approach to how this is going to affect things, and what I expect to happen short term with prices. And I expect most prices on most assets, I expect that supply-demand curve to be way less demand and a whole lot more supply, because there's going to be a whole lot more people on unemployment, and once unemployment stops kicking out that extra $600 a week, then what? So we basically kicked the can down the road until August to figure out what's really going on with our economy. Meanwhile, all of the economic data coming out right now is super negative, and the stock market keeps going up. Stock market's always been irrational. It's a gambler's game. Everybody's making bets. A lot of times, Wayfair is a perfect example. A hugely shorted stock. So every time it goes up, all the short sellers got to sell to cover their bets, so the stock goes up even more, just like Tesla. And we're going to have these sort of crazy swings, and the swings will probably be huge for the rest of the year, I would expect. A lot of volatility. Every time they think, the economy is going to open, then the price of oil is going to go up, and then as soon as we end up having to shut things down a little bit again, then it'll probably crash again. And the layers of the onion continue. So that's what I got for this week. I wish it was better news. It is not. I do want people to know that this is going to be a long-term thing. I said that from the beginning. I stand by that. I feel like we are just at the beginning of this end of quarantine 1, I'm going to call it, and we'll see how this goes, and we'll see what info we get over the next week. And in the future, we will also get into how you get your PPP money forgiven, and other things that people are asking lots of questions on and concerned about. So thanks for listening. Please share, please subscribe, do all the things to help us get the message out there. And we look forward to helping you out, keep some more money in your pocket going forward, so that you can spend it on the things you want to, and potentially invest it in some opportunities that are coming up down the road. So thanks for listening. Catch you next time.